Hello, I'm Raul Fernandez, Chair of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline and Select Board member. This is our task force meeting for September 25th, 2020. Welcome one and all. We have a very packed agenda today. I do want to open with a brief statement, hear from anybody else, and go on about our work. Before we begin, I do want to express my solidarity with the family of Breonna Taylor and the people of Louisville, Kentucky, and to reflect on what this week's decision means for our work. While the brutalization and murder of countless Black people at the hands of police has brought us to this moment, it was the murders of two people in particular that fueled the protest and led to an awakening that compelled our community to create this task force. Their names are George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Sadly, we learned this week that none of the officers who killed Breonna Taylor will face any charges for doing so, none whatsoever. Now, justice was never an option for Breonna Taylor or her family. Justice would have Breonna back alive, in love, and pursuing her dreams. Justice was always an impossibility. But we were reminded that this week, when it comes to policing, accountability is often just as elusive. No question, police have too much power. Power that anywhere you go in this country from its inception to today has been wielded disproportionately against communities of color. But understanding why is critical to our work of reimagining a new model of public safety. The fact is, the police state was created out of fear and as a means of social control. And it continues today only because we allow it to and because we're afraid to find another way. But what's become clear is that we must. We traded away too much in search of security. We traded away George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. We traded away the freedom of Black people, people experiencing homelessness, people with mental health issues, low-income people, women, queer, and trans people. We've traded away all of their freedoms from the indignities that are endemic to policing. Enough. Cost is too fucking high. We've got to hold police accountable, yes, but we also have to hold ourselves and our neighbors accountable for what we've empowered them to do in our communities. Police are not the solution to our problems, and they don't pretend to be. We've empowered them to hold at bay the problems which we've created through unjust systems and have failed to or refused to deal with. But we can't solve our problems through force and brutality. We have to find a better way. And reform, well, reform is simply not enough. Body cams and cell phones didn't prevent the murders of Eric Garner or George Floyd. Diversity won't save us either. No amount of Black officers, attorneys general, DAs, or elected officials will save us, at least not as long as they're complicit in propping up this racist system and fail to use their positions to confront, interrogate, and replace that system. I wish the Reform Committee well, and their work can be important if they refocus their efforts on the urgent and serious work of making policing more safe, transparent, and accountable. As a Select Board member with direct oversight of their work, I'll be watching, and I'll do everything in my power to hold them accountable for meeting that charge. Meanwhile, we'll keep doing what we've been doing, which is to present alternatives to policing that invest in social services rather than spending taxpayer dollars on social control. We'll do this work as a eulogy to Breonna Taylor with hope and love and resolve. So let's get to it. All right. Welcome, everyone. You know, at the top of each meeting, if anyone's got something that they really feel that they need to share, I want to make sure that we provide that opportunity, being mindful, of course, about the limited time we have together and the need to continue this important work. So if you do now or ever do in the future have something that you'd like to share, just please let us know at the top of the meeting. Interrupt me, raise a hand, do something, and we'll make sure that that you're heard. Okay, with that, let us get into it. Our first order of business is to approve the meeting minutes. We're actually approving the minutes from two past weeks. They are from September 11th and from September 18th. Thank you for the edits that were sent in, Devin says. Does anybody have any other edits they'd like to make before approving these minutes? Okay, let's go ahead and do that. If all members of the task force, voting members, can unmute, that'll probably be the easiest thing. If you can do that right now. We'll go down. All those in favor of approving the minutes for September 11th and September 18th, I'll go one by one. Please say aye. Bonnie,
Aye.
Kristen,
Aye.
Chi-Chi,
Aye.
Alexander,
Aye.
Anne,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
Alamas,
Aye.
Malcolm, Kimberly,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye. Some boxes jumped around. I don't think I missed anyone, but if I did, please let me know. Okay, moving forward. We are now moving on to our subcommittee discussion. It's sort of a continuation of our conversation from last week. Where we left off last week is we had a number of different possible ideas for subcommittees. We actually created a survey that went out to all of the voting members of the task force. We asked you which ones you were interested in serving on. You all responded. Thank you for doing that. We also asked you to sort of rank them so we had a better understanding of those that were of greatest interest to the task force members. And out of that resulted 5 different subcommittees, and that should be, actually restarted my computer, so I don't have the packet up right now, but that should have been part of your packet. Is that right, Devin?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was in there. Let's see if I can pull it. So I think I know what they are in my own mind anyway. Those 5 were the envisioning slash sort of community engagement subcommittee. They were the departmental analysis, sort of that 30,000 foot large analysis of the police department subcommittee. There was one on school resource officers, one on the walk and talk unit, and another on the mental health and issues and homelessness as well. So actually, I feel like I need to pull up the packet very quickly so I can have this in front of me. Because it also has the names of the folks that would be on there. And I think it would be helpful for members of the public to follow along as well. Devin, is that something that you can share?
Share my screen.
Yeah, if you have it available.
Hold on one second.
So it'll just take me a minute to get it.
That's a good time to share with the public, though, Raul, that if folks go to brooklinema.gov/165, that brings you to the boards and commissions page. And then you can scroll down to the task force to reimagine policing, and all of the meeting materials are on that page. So just for folks who are following along, pulling up the
That's a nice pro tip right there.
All right, and this should be the descriptions are item 3A, I believe.
Right. And those are very helpfully put together by Task Force member Chi-Chi Wu. And I'd like to review those as well.
Can I just make a quick point?
Yes, please do.
And ask that we don't use the term homelessness, but we make it person-centered and say people who are unhoused or people who don't have homes. It helps to think about people as opposed to a group.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think in my opening remarks, I said people experiencing homelessness. And so, yeah.
I'm just pointing it out for future meetings. And
yeah, no, I think not just that, but also the name of our subcommittee. So
right.
If you'd like to help us figure out what that should be named, that'd be terrific. Yeah.
Okay. All right, do you want to start with the descriptions?
Yes.
Can everyone see this?
Yeah, let me move make my screen a bit bigger. Okay, there we go. So did anybody, if you were able to take a look at the descriptions, Chi-Chi, do you want to walk us through this? I don't think we need to sort of read through everything here. But if there was anything specific you wanted to call out in the language here. I know it's you that put this together. I read through it. I think I had one edit that I see in here, but otherwise it looked good to me.
Yeah, so I should say I drafted these descriptions as drafts. So if folks have comments, they should certainly make them. Definitely appreciate the point about not using the term homeless. I did make an effort to weave in a focus on BIPOC individuals and interactions between police and BIPOC individuals. I don't know how successful I was. And again, these I believe are in draft form and folks should feel free to comment. The thought process is what I tried to capture as best I could. Some of the discussion and descriptions in our previous meeting. It's just a document to give folks an idea of what the charge of, scope or what the mission of each of these subcommittees is. And yeah, I mean, folks should, task force members and others should comment if they feel like these need to be tweaked.
Okay. Any comments, members of the task force? I see Alexander's hand.
Yeah, this is purely a language comment. I think the way that these are talking about what the various subcommittees need to be examining is great. I wonder if we can add a line of like, and propose recommendations for specifically what we want to see change.
They could. What would be helpful is if folks do have comments, if they could supply draft language.
Of course.
Okay, Almas.
Just a comment about the interaction between the committees, because I feel like, say, the mental health and homeless people who are unhoused is going to be connecting somehow with the committee that's doing the departmental analysis, who's going to figure out like the calls, and if the calls are on mental health, somehow there needs to be some, like, that committee on the mental health needs to know that. Like, I'm just trying to figure out the interaction, because you want to figure out, okay, what's happening, what are the calls, and then like the mental health committee would be like, okay, what do we do about it? But we still need to know that information. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, it's a great point. And some of that will be sorted out at these Friday meetings. And so whatever questions you have that arise in the subcommittee meetings, please, whether or not it's a simple question you need to ask, or whether or not you think we need to have a longer discussion about it, please let myself and Devin know, and we will be able to set aside time on the agenda to make sure that we can have that discussion. Okay. By the way, this will create sort of these descriptions now. They won't necessarily be set in stone as the subcommittees go about their work. If you feel like there's a need to make a change, just bring it back to the full committee, and we can go ahead and sort of address those changes. Okay. I want to scroll to the membership of the subcommittees. Is that on the next page, Devin? There you go. Okay. So you should be able to see that too. And I'll just read this out for members of the public that might not be able to see that. Again, the 5 committees. The first one, envisioning and community engagement. Based on your responses, that one, we do have, I think, the greatest number of people because of the work that needs to take place there, and how it will benefit all of the other subcommittees. Bonnie Bastian, Kristen Singleton, Malcolm Cawthorn, Eitan Hirsch, and Chi-Chi Wu. Departmental analysis, Chi-Chi Wu, Mike Sandman, Eitan Hirsch, and I will help supplement the work of that subcommittee, although will not chair it. School resource officers, Alexander Weinstein, Kristen Singleton, Kimberly Richardson, and Malcolm Cawthorn. The walk and talk unit, Kimberly Richardson and Bonnie Bastian. and mental health, and what we will call something related to the unhoused, people who are unhoused, Ann Weaver, Almas Dosa, Alexander Weinstein. I'll also note that there are 3 individuals on here that everyone was kind enough to sign up for a second assignment. I wanted to make sure everybody got access to the first assignment they were interested in. We were able to do that. And then the second assignment, if they were willing to serve, and everyone whose second assignment ended up being one of these top 5 indicated that they'd be willing to serve in a secondary capacity. Thank you for doing that. There were 3 others whose secondary preference did not end up on the top 5 list here that we're engaging in, and that was Mike, Ann, and Almas. And I wanted to offer you the opportunity, although not compel you to do so. If there is a secondary, assignment that you'd like to take on, please let me know. You're certainly welcome to. I would say that I think we've got enough people on envisioning and community engagement, and in the school resource officers, might be able to argue we could use one more person, but in particular, the areas of departmental analysis, walk and talk, and our mental health and people who are unhoused areas, we could potentially use more support. So that's totally up to you. All right.
Now or later?
You could now, if you'd like to, that's fine. Yeah.
I mean, I'd be interested in the departmental analysis.
Okay, great. Almas, is your hand up from before or now?
Oh, sorry, no. But although I would like to say that I guess I need to just figure out like time, how much time, because I would love to be on a second one as well, but it just depends on like time and when they meet, and so I don't want to overcommit myself right now. But I guess if it looks like you have enough people on the other ones, and if the walk and talk unit needs somebody, and if I know what time they meet, and I can try to do that. I'm also interested in the department analysis one, but if there are too many people on that, or if you feel like there's too many different things you're going to do within that committee and you need some extra presence, I just want to leave it open right now, if that's okay.
That is, yes, totally fine. Absolutely. And there are some other areas. I mean, there's one area in particular I do think we need to address, and which is around the area of traffic enforcement. It's one of the most frequent ways that police in our community engage with residents and visitors to our community, and so we do need to address that. That didn't end up on this list, but I'd like to actually circle back to that in a future meeting and think about how we might address that issue. I know we need to, so I wanted to make sure that's clear. Okay. You'll also notice that I put some sort of deadlines for completion of the work for each subcommittee, and I wanted to make sure we're okay with those. I'm, today in this meeting, but also once the subcommittees meet, if you start to think about your work and say, wow, this timeline was way off, I'd like to have a conversation about that too. So for the first 2, the envisioning / community engagement and that departmental analysis, we think we'll need till December 15th to complete that work. And for the other 3, the school resource officers, walk and talk, mental health, people who are unhoused, till November 6th. I'm hoping we can make, put together a more aggressive timeline for that work. Does anybody have any issues with what you see there?
Raul,
Yes.
I was wondering for the community engaging subcommittee, if we do end up going ahead with the tough survey, we might want to get Eitan's feedback on whether it can be completed by December 15th.
Yes. Well, I actually can provide that feedback. Yes. The answer is yes.
Okay,
and
great.
We have that on our agenda today. And we're actually bringing in today, we're having a visit from the principal investigator of that survey. He's going to be joining us at 9 o'clock. So, but the answer is, based on the conversation I had with him earlier this week, yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah. In fact, if we approve it, those surveys will be going out as early as October. and that we'll have the results by early December in our hands.
Excellent. Thank you.
You got it. So, Bonnie.
This is not necessarily about deadlines, but in the chat, someone mentioned what happened to the domestic violence subcommittee, something that I know we can't do all the things, but I think that's a valid question.
Yeah, well, I think it's a valid question too. Yeah, there was the way I see it, we're going to take on this work right now. Having 3 of our subcommittees wrap up their work by November 6th, if we can meet those deadlines, provides us the opportunity to take on additional work, after those are concluded. I think that's certainly an area that needs to be addressed. I think we've got to figure out, look at the work of the reform committee along the way, figure out what piece of that they're taking on, and then think about what piece of that it makes sense for us to take on. So I think all of the ones that ended up on the survey, and probably more, are all very important and need to be addressed. With the 11 members that we have here and our supporting cast, we can only do so much with so much time. So this is the area, based on the expertise of the group we have right now, that we're going to address, and then I'm hopeful that we can get to those other issues that are not just community interest, but are just critical need areas too. So yeah. Almas.
Just to clarify for the deadline, so like just the scope, like say for the mental health one, December 6th. So when I'm thinking, I just want to clarify. So the scope is, if you go back to the actual description of the subcommittee, are we expected to do all these things? Like, I just want to make sure I clarify, because that's a lot of stuff. And but is that the expectation, that everything that's on the description is done by December 6th, or is there some sort of interim? Because I know there's a report due February, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the final task. So I just want to clarify, like, the scope by December 6th.
Yeah, I'd like that. I think it's important, especially that later deadline, the December. You mean November 6th, but December 15th.
Sorry, yeah.
Thinking about the later deadline first, though, I'm mindful that that puts us into a number of holidays, the holiday season, as we call it. During and immediately after that date, New Year's, and then into basically our final month, January, where I think a lot of, if we can, and if we feel like we need more time, that's something I can go back to the select board and say, look, this is, here's what we've been able to accomplish, but we need more time to complete our task. I can certainly go back to the select board and request more time for that. And it also requires the buy-in of this task force to be able to continue to do this work. But if we're going to meet the established deadline of the charge, and produce a report, a publicly available report, and then present that report at a select board meeting, we're going to need some time to do some writing on that, and some refining, some editing, and so that's a good part of the month of January, I think, needs to be spent doing that. We'll set this timeline right now. We keep an eye on it. If we feel like the work that needs to be done simply cannot be completed within this timeline, we can work to extend it. And that goes for that goes also for the November 6th subcommittee dates. But I do want to set some aggressive targets so that we have some sense of urgency around this work. But happy to hear from the task force. If you think we need to make changes, we can discuss that and even do that now. Anne?
Hi, I was thinking about how to describe the subcommittee I'm on, and then Bonnie brought up domestic violence issues. And when I think about the task that I've been assigned with Almas and Alexander, I think of it more as how vulnerable people and people in crisis are supported or not supported with Brookline Police Department and what we can offer them instead as an option. So I'm just wondering, it takes away from the two specific categories of mental health and unhoused people by writing it as vulnerable people and people in crisis. And that would also include then people in domestic violence situations. I'm just wondering what folks think about that
Okay.
as an option.
Yeah. I'm certainly open to it as an option. Let's hear from some other folks. Kristen?
I'm happy to hold my question if people want to answer what Anne put out on the table. I'm in support of it, so I can certainly hold my question if other folks wanted to weigh in on Anne's comment.
All right, let's circle back to you then, Kristen. Anyone else on Anne's question? Sorry, Alexander. I have to scroll to see all of you because we're in full screen. So if you're not using the blue hand, I might miss you.
I'm sorry. I'll use the blue hand instead. Thanks. I agree. I think that's a good idea. And I think that what that would then enable us to possibly include is looking more closely at how the police handle drug abuse for people in crisis could certainly be included in that. I am a big believer in that when you are using an umbrella term, then maybe in the description it's useful to say, including but not limited to use a terrible lawyerly term, but like we're specifically also looking at these categories of problems just to make sure that we don't drop one.
That makes sense to me. Chi-Chi?
I certainly don't have any objection to broadening the scope of that particular subcommittee. It should be up to the folks who are on that subcommittee. I just wanted to caution that the more issues you add to the subcommittee, the more work there is. And there has been expressed some concern about the tight deadlines. So the folks on the subcommittee should think about that.
Right. Also will require a little bit more organizing, especially in that first meeting, to really figure out how you're going to try to tackle, what's, pretty large topic.
To me, it's the same thing. It's how to support people in crisis or who are vulnerable in some way or another, however you want to define that, right, in Brookline, as opposed to calling the police. So in a way, it opens it up more for me in a good way, in a useful way.
Yeah, I mean, if I could respond, I think the issues are all interrelated, of course, and certainly it's about the response of police to vulnerable populations and populations with differences. The only thing is, if these subcommittees are bringing in outside experts, then perhaps that means you'll need to bring in more folks and talk to more folks who have expertise on those particular populations.
Yeah. And of course, Anne, I certainly defer to your expertise in this area in terms of not just the framing of the work, but also the important constituencies that need to be included in the work. So, yeah. Any other thoughts on this question? Okay. So if in that first meeting, Anne, Alexander, Almas, if you can, really think about how to clarify how you're going to approach and by the way, every subcommittee should be doing this anyways, thinking about what your work plan is going to be, how you're going to, address the topic in front of you, and that likely after at a future meeting very soon is something that we're going to want every subcommittee to report back on, is what their work plan is going to be. Okay, Kristen, let's get to your question or comment.
Thanks. Question was largely around logistics and planning. We're fortunate to have Chief O'Leary coming to these conversations with us, but if we have concurrent work of subcommittees going on over the course of the next month and a half, I'm just curious to know if we have thoughts about how we can both bring in expertise from the Brookline Police Department, and then all of the, in the orbit of specific questions that we're trying to get answers to, how can we do that in a way that is reasonable, practical, and doable?
It's a great question. Let me first zoom out and just start by saying all of our great staff that are tasked to this task force are not at all expected to be at the subcommittee meetings, although you may request their participation if there's an issue in particular that you need some support on or would like to have addressed. I'll ask Dan to chime in a second, but I see Mel is unmuted.
I was just going to say that I think if you're going to make subcommittees are going to make a request, you can go directly to Dan O'Leary. I would ask that only chairs of the subcommittees, do that, and he will have to determine, the resources and practicality of participating. But I think all the requests for staff resources should go directly to Dan, unless they're something other than police department resources. If there are other resources, you can contact me directly.
Great, thank you, Mel. Dan, does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Actually, I've already talked to several members of the department that work in these areas, and they're more than willing, expressed being more than willing to come and talk to committees and answer committees' questions about the work that they do. So that should not be an issue.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm also reminded to remind you that subcommittee work is also subject to open meeting law, as is our work here in the larger task force, and that the same rules that we're abiding to now, not having any deliberations or substantive discussions other than just scheduling, that you shouldn't be having with subcommittee members outside of our meetings, which will be in the public view. I know that all of our meetings, we're going to make sure we record all of our meetings. I don't know, and make them available via Zoom for anybody who wants to join. I'll talk with Devin. I don't know that we're going to be able to ask Big to live stream all of them. That's a lot of work that we'd be asking them to do there, but the meetings will certainly be publicly available, publicly posted on our website, available for anyone to Zoom in and watch, and when you have public comment to engage with the subcommittee as well. And that when you all begin, in that first organizing meeting, one of the things that we need to do is for you all to decide upon a subcommittee chair, and that's the person who Mel rightly pointed out should be doing any communication with Dan, really myself on behalf of the subcommittee, Devin or Mel, and of course Devin will support you in all of the notification and public posting of subcommittee meetings and all that kind of stuff. So you just need to work with her to make sure to get that all scheduled.
Yeah, that's a good point, Raul. If you don't mind, I just want to, the Committee on Policing Reforms just established their subcommittees as well. And unfortunately, a couple of them have sent agendas to me to post, but they're already past the deadline of when they want to post. So that is something to be very mindful of. It is a 48-hour posting requirement, and the weekends do not count. So if you would like to have a meeting on Monday at 5, it needs to be posted by Thursday at 5. So my request is, 24 hours ahead of time, if possible, to me prior to the posting deadline would be great, just so I can get all that information up and we're well within the time constraint.
And there's good reason for this. We want to make sure that the public has adequate notice that we're going to be meeting so that they can follow our work. This is a public process. So it's important that we do that. Okay, any other questions or comments about subcommittees?
Just a logistical question. Since the subcommittees don't have chairs yet, who's going to be responsible for scheduling their first meeting?
Devin, how do you normally do that?
What has happened in the past is that the group just connects via email, like you said, for logistics purposes. Everybody throws around a couple dates. A bunch of committees have been saying, does this recurring date and time work? And that's also a good idea, because then I could always post a generic agenda for you guys and things can, be changed after the fact once it's posted. But people have just been sort of discussing via email, and then it's usually kind of a quick process.
So just to clarify, emailing other subcommittee members just for the purpose of scheduling is fine. It's not a violation of the open meeting law.
Michael can confirm that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, so that is confirmed. And just, I think this question actually came up in the chat last week, and I didn't get a chance to respond, but I think pretty much the rule is that there is no email communications between a quorum of a committee or a public body. However, there are exceptions to that rule. I think this is the best way to look at it. There are exceptions to that rule, and one of those exceptions being to schedule meetings, and also you can share the documents that are going to be discussed at that meeting. But I think the best practice, which has been followed with this committee, the full committee, has been the documents are sent to Devin and she posts them to the OneDrive account. So I think that's the best way to do it. But so you can discuss though scheduling by email.
Great, thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the subcommittee scheduling stuff that goes down with the advisory committee. And what Michael said is correct. As long as you're not discussing substantive matters in the email, or opinion, or I think this or that about a particular issue, anything logistics, anything deals with logistics is fine, and it's also the only practical way to deal with it.
Right. Almas.
So then I just was trying to look through my stuff. I don't think we have emails addresses for anybody. At least I have it for Raul and Devin, but I'm not sure about the other folks. And maybe I missed something, but I don't have email addresses. And then the other thing is, if there are other subcommittees that we want to listen into, like, I guess we just find out through going to the mass.gov website, like, even if I don't have time to be on a subcommittee, but I'd like to listen in, or is the best way to listen to the recording? Those are the two questions I have.
I can field that one. So Almas, if you sign up on Notify Me, which is on the front page of brooklinema.gov, you can check off this committee, the Task Force to Reimagine, as well as the Police Reform Committee, and then you'll get a notification for every single meeting that's posted for those two groups. And the subcommittees fall within the larger committee umbrella, so that is the notification email system that will let you know the 48 hours in advance, and it will also give you the link to the Zoom meeting so you can join.
Great. Devin, is it possible for you to initiate for each subcommittee just an email chain that says, okay, connecting you all, please communicate and let me know when you'd like to have your first meeting?
Yes, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, great. Feel like we are in a good place right now to wrap this item up. I will say that this is not we're not closing this conversation. We can reopen the conversation about subcommittees at any point in time. I do think that what I'd like is for each of you to have that organizing meeting, figuring out if there are any questions that you feel are unresolved about the formation of the subcommittees or the direction of the subcommittees. You can bring those back to the larger task force. We can address them so you can go about your work. The primary thing that I think would be most helpful to focus on, you may not get this done in your first meeting, but at least perhaps by the second time you meet, is really to have an idea of what your work plan is going to be, which is, again, something that you can amend over time, but at least a draft work plan of how are we going to get from here to there, based on whatever it is, whatever the work is that you need to do within your subcommittees. And so the other thing we need to do as a task force is to vote on this package that we have here. The subcommittee descriptions, as well as the membership and timelines that you have before you, with the understanding that we can come back and make amendments to that. Okay. So the one change that I have, and so we'll vote it with that change, is to add Ann Weaver to the departmental analysis subcommittee. And all right, so I'd like to, any discussion before we vote on this? Okay, I'd like to move approval with the addition that I mentioned of the subcommittee, the subcommittees, their descriptions, the membership, and the timelines as listed in your packet. We'll do a roll call vote. I'll go across and please, again, everyone, if you can unmute, I love it. We'll make it quicker. Almas.
Aye.
Anne.
Aye.
Kristen.
Aye.
Bonnie.
Aye.
Chi-Chi.
Aye.
Alexander.
Aye.
Mike.
Aye.
Kimberly.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Malcolm, sorry, Malcolm.
Aye.
Sorry, when you're off screen, you end up on the bottom there. Thank you, Malcolm, appreciate you. All right, so that's unanimous. And of course, Eitan wasn't here to vote on that, but I'm sure he's a huge supporter of everything we're doing here. He'll be back soon at the next meeting, I believe. Okay, good. I'm mindful of the time. It's 8:44. We have, again, the principal investigator of the survey that's being done by Tufts University, which we'll discuss in a bit, is going to be joining us at 9 o'clock to discuss that. That's Dr. Brian Schaffner. In the meantime, I wanted to see if, we went into overtime last week in discussion of the presentation that Dan made to the task force. And I know that unfortunately, even with overtime, there's probably a lot more that folks might have wanted to discuss. I'm wondering if there's anything sort of unresolved that you'd like to address now, or whether or not, also Dan, if you feel like you didn't have enough opportunity to respond to the many questions that there were. So I wanted to provide just that additional space, the continuation of the space we had last week, to address any other questions or issues that came up. Dan, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to go first?
Sure. I did want to, I was a little concerned about how we ended, talking about the police in schools, and particularly in the high school and grammar schools. And so I went and I did a little research when I get back. So I called the officers who directly were involved at the time. None of the three that I talked to are still employed with the police department, but I did talk to them as to when they began their activities. And I checked first with Jocelyn Ham. That was her maiden name, Jocelyn Murphy. She was our juvenile officer in the late 1980s. And she was the officer that I was thinking about when the school and police got the agreement to have the police come into the schools. And I asked her about her role with the schools. And she said that it was probably around 1988 that she began to be asked to come into the high school. I know Malcolm mentioned that he didn't see a police officer walking around. He wouldn't. She was in plain clothes. She was asked to come in by both teachers and administrators to teach or to talk to the students about various topics. She also felt that when she gained the trust of some administrators, they asked her for her advice on some cases that they were investigating, mostly dealing with 51A cases such as child abuse and neglect. And she felt that her role was to advise them on how they were to proceed. She was in that role, and she had said that she had done both of those things, both talk to the classes and do some investigations until 1989, when she resigned from the police department. I then called both Ron McNeil and Phil Harrington, who were DARE officers, started the program. They both said that they started the program in the grammar schools in 1990. Their first school was St. Mary's, and from there they started going into the public schools. In 1995, they started a DEAR curriculum at the high school where they went and taught the freshman class. And that's kind of a more clarification when I said late 1980s, early 1990s. That's the best of those people's recollection.
Dan, I'm sure, and we're going to have a task force that's focused on this work, and which I think is important in understanding, some of the history that you're laying out, but also sort of, why we might have officers in schools today, what their objectives are, and whether or not those objectives might be better handled by other personnel. One of the things that I was looking at the state statute, which indicates that that when we have police in schools in particular, that there needs to be an MOU that is signed by I think the superintendent and the chief of police. I couldn't find anything online, either on the schools or on the police side. Are you aware of an MOU existing and where we might be able to find it?
There is an MOU. I actually have a copy of it. I can. It was signed. The most recent one was signed probably a couple of years ago by Chief Lipson and the school superintendent. And I can get it to Devin today. I guess I could do that. Okay.
That'd be terrific. Yeah, to share with the task force, and I'm sure the subcommittee will need that too. But the larger task force, I'm sure, would be interested. Great, thank you. Any other questions about any part of the presentation? There was a lot there. We talked about some of the crime data, 911 calls. We dug a little bit on some of these more specifics. And so let me know if you have other questions. Dan, I had just one more, which was about, we brought up sort of the direct calls for service to the department, the idea that those were only maintained for 30 days. I did want to follow up on that. And you mentioned, is that something that I need to follow up with the IT department, or who do we need to follow up with on that to understand why those records are only kept for 30 days?
It's the phone system's maintained by the town's IT department. So when I was trying to look for the data, I asked Scott Wilder, our IT guy, to call the town, and it's a total of 60 days, and they have the last two 30-day intervals of the business calls that come into the dispatch center, and that's both police calls and fire calls. Just a little bit on the dispatch center. The dispatch center is the main line, the 2222 line. So the vast majority of calls that come into the police station go through there. And if they're looking for individual divisions or people to talk to, they then transfer them. So that would have a good, if they could, give you the 30 days, that you would get a good feel for the amount of calls that come in. I will say, talking to Darius, who is the supervisor within the dispatch center, he said the calls are down a little bit compared to the previous years based on the COVID-19.
Right.
So, and so it is the IT.
Okay. All right. We'll follow up. That might be something we can follow up on as part of the departmental subcommittee. Mike.
Yeah. A question for Dan. When a call comes in, does the operator who receives it have what sort of record do they keep? Do they categorize in any way? Do they, what is there some way to create a database going forward that would tell us whether a call was about somebody running a leaf blower or somebody robbing a bank? Where does the where does the data that's sort of implicit in that call go?
The data is in our CAD system, and it should have been part of those volumes of paper I sent over last week for analysis. We can get the call. The calls come in directly to the dispatch center. They're all recorded. They do engage the person in conversation to find out what the issue is. And if it's going to result in the dispatch of a police officer, they do assign a C number. I think, just going off the top of my head, I think 2019, there were maybe 65,000 C numbers. I mean, case numbers issued through CAD, not case numbers, but entries into CAD by the dispatch people. And I'm almost, if not, I'll get it to you, but I'm positive that that was part of the documents that, the extended documents that I submitted to the committee.
Right, but is that the 911 number or the business number?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
So the business numbers are also categorized in some fashion.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
I do have one other point of clarification. I know when I talked about the crimes and the Part A crimes that all departments across the country are judged on, and that's what the FBI, when you see the releasing of stats up or down, they have that information, and that's what everyone is. All the police departments across the country have to submit that data to the FBI, and they in turn and put it out publicly. But we maintain it as well, and those numbers that you got from me were only for those crimes, and I didn't want people to leave and say that that was the only criminal activity that we investigate, that the police department investigates, because it's not. It's far from it. Those are just the most classified as the most serious and probably the most accurately reported. And that judgment is made someone beyond the Brookline Police Department. It's in the federal government, and it has been that way for years. So,
I was going to ask you, what are some of the crimes that might not be captured in that report?
Cybercrime, fraud investigations, drug offenses, OUIs, things like that. Those categories have been consistent over the years. Reporting systems have changed from the UCR reports now to the NIBARS reports. It's more extensive, but the categories have not changed. And so what I did this week is I asked for a document that shows not only the crimes that are investigated, but the crimes that are included in those investigations. So I think that you saw on the information that I gave you from the dispatch center about crime numbers being assigned or case numbers being assigned. I think the number was about 8,000, 7,000, 8,000. But within those 7,000, 8,000, there's actually that for 2019, there's probably 22,000 offenses or activities that are readily identified by our CAD system. So yesterday I got the reports on that data from 2018 and 2019. I want to put together a cover sheet, try to do a better way to explain it as to what I'm trying to say right now, and then get it to Devin by sometime either Monday or Tuesday. And that you can take, and that's really a more extensive look at the investigations that are done, the arrests that are made, and the subcategories of arrest. And you should be able to get a better feel of the amount of activity that goes on in town, instead of just looking at Part A crimes. So expect that sometime early next week.
Great, thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay. Malcolm.
Yeah, so I want to go back to the school issue. I'm really curious how information is shared when a decision is made to put a police officer into a school. One of the things that I was trying to sort of point out in the last meeting was, it seems as if like there's people at the top who are making these decisions, and then the officer shows up. Like in the specific case I was referring to, I was really more worried about students and families being notified. But even as a professional who's worked as a teacher for a long time, like, it's one thing for me to see police officers come in and out of the school for certain instances or whatever thing. It's another thing to know a police officer is stationed at the school. And I'm wondering how that gets disseminated out, or if there's even any sort of communication or consultation beyond, I guess, upper administration. And then just something sort of for me is like being in a public meeting, public record. I mean, I want to be really honest here. I felt really uncomfortable when Chief O'Leary, when you read a text into a public record. And I'm wondering if we could actually get the content of the text put into public record. Because I mean, it's hard for me to know if you're paraphrasing, if you're, what's actually in there. I don't, but it actually felt really awkward for me, especially when somebody was actually on the call. And we can see panelists are putting stuff into the Q&A as well as the chat. And so I'm curious if that could happen beyond what you said that Friday. So I guess there's really two elements to that question.
The second element, I told you it came from one of the sergeants that was in on the chat, who was listening, who had spoken to the principal, and I'm not sure, is it the assistant principal at the high school?
Well, I understand that, but like she was on the call, like that could have also been put in the Q&A or in the chat, and you read something. I don't know. I mean, you know what I mean? I probably would have paraphrased the text. I probably wouldn't have read it all. But what I'm asking, I mean, we're in a public meeting and there's a public record of what you said as opposed to what the text was. And that's all I'm saying. I don't even know procedurally. That's it. But it feels awkward to me in a public meeting. Like I could look at my phone and say that anybody texted me and read something, right? And so, yeah, it feels uncomfortable to me, right?
Okay,
and that's just more of a procedural thing. And I don't know if you're actually willing to do it, and I don't know if we can compel you to do it. I just think in pointing that out, perhaps maybe that's something we should reckon with in terms of trying to read text into a public record. That's all. That's what I'm saying.
I think I did say where it came from before I even read it, or after it.
Well,
So.
you did.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is I probably wouldn't have read a full text. Again, I could pick this up and I can look on Who's the Panelist and say, so-and-so just texted me and here's what they say. And, again, to me, when you're on the call, you also have the option, like that could have been put in the chat in a public way. Instead, it went directly to you and you read something that frankly was a little awkward, especially like you had two names and not the name of the MECO person. Like that's all I'm saying. If we're reading something in public record, we should actually have a record of it. There's some written text somewhere. And that's all I'm saying.
Okay.
But the other question is really important too, about how that sort of filters in, or if it even does.
Well, I can speak for internally in the police department. And when we have an opening in a unit or a position, it's posted. We ask for people that are interested in it. We ask them to provide their background. We ask them to give us any information that can assist in making the proper decision. They're then brought in for an interview. All people that have applied for it get an interview by a certain number of officers that are their supervisors. Those supervisors that do the interviews speak to the current supervisors of the people that have put in for it and talk about their work ethic and how they performed and things like that. Then decisions are made and it's passed on to the chief, usually with the one or two recommendations, and either one of those can be selected by the chief. Now, where it goes from there, as far as the schools, whether they, I don't know whether, say, Caitlin, who's up to high school, I know they were familiar with her because that was her route. She was assigned to that sector. But I don't know if what role the school played in her selection. I can't answer that. When you asked about station versus SROs, I guess, something like that, you didn't quite use that term, but who decides who's stationed at the officer? I look at the word stationed as being the person that's, remember, for years that we had a car in front of the station that and stationed in front of the high school when it opened and when it closed. And that was in direct request by, I think it started with, it started years ago, and I'm drawing a blank. It was a longtime school superintendent, lived up on Summit Ave. Help me.
On Summit Ave, maybe Walsh.
No.
Sperber.
No, school. No, I mean school principal. Who's the principal?
Oh, school principal.
Come on, he met everybody at high school when he came in. Everybody knows.
Weintraub.
Wore cowboy boots all the time. Yes.
Yeah, Weintraub.
Dr. Bob.
Yeah, he started the request to have the cars up there, and that's when we started stationing officers in front of the school.
Well, let's make sure we have this conversation as part of the subcommittee work. I think it's important that you're reminding me that for each of our different areas of analysis, we really want to look at the history too. We want to understand, for instance, the walk and talk unit, how that, and I know that the Committee on Policing Reforms is also looking at that particular area, so we can learn from some of the work that they're doing as well, and that, Dan, you're involved in on both. But to understand the history of how some of these either units or programs or whatever they were have come to be, I think is going to be an important part of our reporting out in the final analysis. So I want to put a pin in this for right now and come back to it if need be. We are now joined by Dr. Brian Schaffner, who is the Newhouse Professor of Civic Studies at the Department of Political Science in Tisch College at Tufts University. Unfortunately, we don't have Eitan with us today, but Eitan, our task force member, Eitan Hirsch, connected us with Dr. Schaffner and the work that you're doing. Brian, first of all, welcome. How you doing? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and the work that Brian, you and your team are doing around understanding attitudes related to policing, as well as both reform and reimagining, budgeting, policing, all of it, and that survey is going to be done in both Medford and Somerville, and there's an opportunity for us as Brookline to participate in that as well. Folks, you have the survey in your packet, so again, in your packet, that last agenda item, you'll be able to see the survey and exactly what the questions are and what that looks like. Maybe Brian, if you can just start with a sort of running down exactly, what this survey is about, what you hope to uncover, and then maybe some of the logistics of what us as Brookline engaging in this survey might look like, and then we'll take questions from the task force.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I don't want to, I'll spare you too much detail, but basically over the summer, I started working with a set of 8 Tufts students, all students of color at Tufts University. And basically, we wanted to set out to better sort of understand policing in the 2 communities that host the Tufts University main campus, so Somerville and Medford. It made sense from our perspective because the students at Tufts interact mostly with those 2 communities, and I felt like it would be a way for them to feel sort of a bit more empowered, and also for us to do a service to the community by providing sort of information about how residents experiences with those police departments are like, and sort of what their views are about how policing should be done going forward. So the way this is designed is basically that we start with the resident list from the towns, and we basically are mailing survey. We're taking a sample of residents, and we're oversampling residents from census blocks with higher non-white populations, and then we can go back and sort of reweight the data on the back end to adjust for that. But basically, the idea is we want to make sure we represent sort of a diversity of views in the community. We are in each community, we're sending out, we're basically sampling 12,500 individuals in each community. We expect to get somewhere between a 5 and 10% response rate to these letters. So we're sending each person a letter and inviting them to go online and take a survey. I think based on previous experience with doing this kind of survey, we think we'll get about 5 or 10%, who will agree to do the survey, which will give us a nice sample size in each community. And I mean, as you can see from the survey, we have lots of questions. These were basically really driven by the students. They did a lot of work on this. They researched what other surveys had done in terms of asking about things like this. Other communities who had done surveys like this, they looked at their surveys to get ideas for questions. And of course, they had ideas of their own as well. And you can see there's a mix of questions. There's some that ask people to sort of write about experiences that they've had. And then there's also some, other questions asking about specific reform proposals and that kind of thing. So I don't know if I'll just sort of leave it at that, and of course take questions, because I'm sure I'm missing something that's important, but I think that gives a quick summary at least.
I think that's helpful. Mel, would you like to weigh in here?
I had some more general comments about surveys and town, how the town does it. So if there are more specific questions about this particular survey, you can go there. But when that detailed conversation concludes, I'll need to go over some town-wide issues and policies around surveys.
Sounds good. Mike.
So I went through the survey, and the questions I answered the questions myself. It's interesting. The survey sort of makes you think, and it's actually very useful for us as a group, I think. But my question for you is, what do you expect the community to do with the survey, or what's the outcome? It's obviously a good experience for the students. Provide some information about, difficult to know how statistically valid it is, but it's just the same. It's more than an anecdote, so there's some validity to it. But then what? What do you think? What will Medford and Somerville be doing with this?
To be honest, I don't know what they'll do with it. Our idea is to basically collect data that we think is going to be very representative of what the community's sort of their experiences and what they think, and to present that to the both to the elected officials and also the stakeholders in both communities. I think, at that point, I leave it to others in a way. I feel like my role as an academic is to sort of provide information that people can act on or not act on. It's up to them, of course. As a resident of Medford, I guess I have a view about or I will presumably have a view about what I think should be done once I see these results. Maybe that these results come back and we see that, oh, actually everyone's perfectly satisfied with what's going on and there are no, negative experiences, or I'm not, or, we may get that people are extremely dissatisfied. I actually don't have a strong notion about sort of what this data will look like when we get it back. But I think that what's most important is that we know the answers to these questions. And I think the reason I wanted to do a survey like this is because I think a lot of other ways that, and I should say, one of the things I study is local politics and local government. I think a lot of the other venues that we have for soliciting opinions and experiences from residents tend to be highly biased in terms of who shows up to those meetings. So town meetings, council meetings, open forum, stuff like that. I think we know pretty well that the types of people who come to those tend to overrepresent a certain type of resident and underrepresent another type. And why I think this is valuable is because we will specifically be going after the views of all residents, including and especially those who don't necessarily show up to venues where local governments solicit views from their residents.
Okay, thanks. It might be interesting in the next semester to take the data and or look back on it a year later and say, okay, what happened with this?
Yeah, yeah.
Be interesting, even as an academic exercise.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Chi-Chi.
Hi, Ryan. First of all, thanks for coming to this meeting. Thanks for being willing to consider Brookline as part of this. I'm going to ask you two really tough questions that you might not have the answer to. And, maybe what Mel says is going to bear upon the first one, which is, you had mentioned that you were going to try to oversample census blocks where there are higher numbers of people of color. As you probably have a sense, Brookline is different from Somerville and Medford in terms of its demographics. First of all, I'm, the percentages of Black and Latinx residents is lower, I think. The largest racial minority is actually Asian Americans. And then for Asian Americans, the residential segregation is not as stark as for other communities. And so I'm wondering if there are other methods besides targeting particular census blocks for oversampling. There's software, for example, that identifies on the basis of name. And then the second question, which is probably not more directed to you and probably more for the subcommittee, is that your survey focuses on residents. Obviously one issue we've heard a lot about Brookline is the interaction between police and guests to the town.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, on the first point, yeah, you're right. I should say, first of all, I haven't looked at the sort of the block by block, the census block by census block data on Brookline yet. So I don't, I was only going to do that if you guys decide to move forward. So if it is the case that there's not enough sort of segregation in order to make sort of block oversampling possible, then you're right that like the alternative would be sort of these name algorithms that allow to identify sort of likely people who are likely to be more likely to be Asian or more likely to be Latinx or whatever. So we could potentially use that approach, and those are easy to apply to the kind of data we'd be sampling from. And I also think based on my preliminary discussions, I think the sample size is also going to be bigger for Brookline, or at least that was the idea, which will also help as well, because as we are sending letters to a larger share of the population, we'll just naturally be able to get more of any given group. So a larger sample will help us make sure we're representing any even smaller minority groups. Oh shoot, now I've the second question.
Yeah, don't worry about the second. That's actually not
okay.
Really. Yeah, it's commenting on the fact that the survey is directed at residents, and one of the issues we have is interaction of police and guests.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything I could do in the sort of in the confines of this particular project to like get at guests. I mean, I guess a couple of the questions in the survey ask people to talk about how they think others are treated by police, and so that would maybe be the closest approximation to be able to deal with that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chi-Chi. I'll note also we have a public hearing on coming up next Wednesday, a joint hearing with the Committee on Policing Reforms, and we'll have other opportunities to create our own forums. And in the sort of the write-up that I created to help promote we'll talk about that forum in just a little bit, the hearing. I mean, one of the things that I want to hear from members of the public, including those who live outside of Brookline, who are engaging and may have some thoughts about policing in Brookline. So we'll have to get at that in other ways, but that's a really important point, I think. Bonnie.
I have a lot of feelings about this. And so this is only in the context of us. You guys design whatever you like. But I also want to put this into the context that there is already another survey on this moving through BHA, or about to. So we have to think about the idea that there's two there's very possibly 2 surveys that would be on the same content going to the same people. And then if that's true, and if their survey, the Reform Committee survey is used and this is used, you have to imagine the perspective of someone in BHA receiving 2 surveys, and then the second survey, the beginning of it talks about a study. So this is a study. We're studying you. We're studying. We're studying your community as just a feeling. Like, what does that feel when you get 2 like endless surveys, studying your experience, and then thinking about content, the way that, and please let me know if I'm being too politically correct or anything, but this, to me, this survey doesn't say that we are trustworthy. As someone who will be a part of the community engagement group, I would like to see something like, something as small but very important as in the list of categories of race. It says Latino instead of Latinx. It says American Indian instead of Native American. These are really important details in putting ourselves out there as people who are thinking this through really hard. We are trustworthy people. We are going to protect your information. We want to be very, very respectful. That's not what all of these say to me. I don't want to, spend tons of time going through each one, but I have a lot of comments for many of these. This also, I don't know. I'm curious about what other people think about this. And I'm also curious, if we use this, do we get to decide where this survey goes, or will the Tufts study get to decide where this survey goes?
Is that I don't know if that's a question for me.
Can you clarify what you mean, Bonnie, by where the survey goes?
Do we get to decide? I'm not sure if Tufts has a way that they need to do this to include it into the study. Like, can we decide that this only goes to Brookline housing people, or which communities this goes to, or does Tufts decide that?
So Tufts University has obviously a institutional review board, which oversees all research that's done. So this has already been approved to run in Medford and Somerville with the sort of the sampling design that I already talked about. I'm going to have to amend, if we do it in Brookline, I'll have to amend the institutional review board document to just include Brookline. And if there's some need to ask for a specific sampling strategy that focuses on some areas and not others, or whatever, that's possible. Like, we could certainly do that at this stage. So it'll make the, if that were to be done, then we'd make it would make the comparison with the other communities more difficult, obviously, but that may not be of interest on your end. So that's sort of up to you. First point about the race question is fair, and actually I've already added a note to revise that. I think I was taking a version of a question that we use on another national survey that I run, that we've been using for years, and but I think that's a fair point, and definitely something I would want to revise. Thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Anne.
Hi, thanks for joining us. My first question is a thought to our group of what need does this serve if we go ahead with this survey. It feels to me a little heavy on the reform aspect of policing vis-a-vis a reimagining police, agenda, which is our agenda. So that was my first thought when I read it. I mean, I think it's a good survey for what it's looking at. I'm just not sure if it really fits our needs per se. I would want more reimagining types of questions in there. I agree with Bonnie. That stood out to me too, the language being used, the descriptions. And I'm also just wondering, as a qualitative mixed methods type of person, I noticed that there's no line in the survey if we are interested in talking to people one-on-one for a kind of qualitative part of our research, and would you be interested in doing that, and how to get in touch with people, somebody from the research site, if you are, to give some contact number and just mention the idea of interviews to get more information. So those are just the thoughts that I had when I read it. Primarily, what is the use for us in terms of this committee to use this particular tool for our purposes? Is it useful or not? Thanks.
Yeah, that's something we'll have to determine. It's a fair question. Yeah. Okay.
In terms of, I'll just respond to the follow-up, the point about following up with certain respondents. This survey is obviously very sensitive, and therefore it's important that it be that anonymity be protected. So an important part of the procedures that are involved for having it approved by Tufts was that people cannot be tied back to their responses. I think that it's probably pretty clear why that would be the case. So I don't think there would be any procedure for allowing on your end to follow up with a specific survey respondent. I think I could envision having like on the last page of the survey or something, like if you have more you want to say about this, or if you want to make your, here's where you can go, hyperlink to a website or something like that, or a phone number or whatever. I think that could easily be built in though.
That's great. I think that'd be a terrific addition. Chi-Chi.
So I just wanted to follow up on some of the points Anne raised. I think on one hand, you're absolutely right. A lot of this does focus more on the reform committee, and it would be great to have a survey asking folks, who do you think should respond to an overdose or a mental health situation? If we had a ready-made survey that we could participate with that, I think that would be awesome. I mean, the thing I worry about is we're looking at a December 15th deadline. And, obviously putting something together and running a survey like that isn't going to happen by December 15th. I mean, if we participate in this, we will get something by December 15th, and that's because it's already all set up. So I think we need to weigh the practicalities of these tight deadlines. The other thing is, in terms of talking to people, we had I think mentioned the idea of focus groups, and I don't know if we have the resources to get someone to do focus groups, but certainly that could be another tool of engagement that we want to look at. And I don't know if this is the right place to discuss this, or the envisioning subcommittee. Raul, tell me if we're getting too much into the weeds on this.
I think you're absolutely right. And the way I think I mentioned last week was, I think of this set of data needs to be considered as part of the larger set of data that we'll be accumulating through our work. And the vast majority of the data that I think we're going to accumulate is going to be through direct engagement with residents whether it be in these public hearings or forums or interviews or focus groups or whatever the envisioning and community engagement subcommittee and the greater work of the task force leads us to, and that this is an element that I think can be helpful in our understanding of attitudes around policing and related to reforms and other other elements of policing, but it needs to be considered in that larger context. But yes, I think we need to figure out what that looks like going forward, what community engagement looks like going forward.
Can I just follow up quickly? I like what Brian was saying about how the survey is reaching out to people in the community who might not ordinarily be engaged in these discussions. When we have these discussions as a community in Brookline, we generally speaking tend to hear from the same people. And obviously we would need to do more reaching out for any focus group or any kind of follow up interviews with folks in our community. But the nice thing about a survey is it does kind of reach out to the wider, broader audience. So we may actually get interest from people who might not normally even know about the work we're doing. It's a good way of recruiting people who we don't normally hear from.
I'm going to take Almas. I'm also want to make us aware of the time, 9:28. I don't know how much longer we have, Dr. Schaffner. So I want to start working us toward resolution, whatever that looks like, and give Mel an opportunity to weigh in as well. Almas.
Just adding to what Ann and Chi was saying, I understand that maybe the survey is more focused on reforms, but there are a few questions that also address reimagining to some extent. I think like question 34, question 35 also asks, what do you think, who do you think should be doing, working on what mental health besides the police? And so there are a couple of questions that I think would be useful for reimagining as well. And ideally in a survey, I think, you do the survey and then it's very quantitative. You can't get the qualitative stuff, but, usually you've done surveys, follow up with like focus groups or specifically on particular subjects that come out from the survey. And of course, some people do it the other way around. You do focus groups first to figure out what to put in the survey. But just to say that, again, with the timeline, I don't know what that's possible. So we may have to end up doing something concurrently for focus groups.
Yeah, thanks, Almas. Okay, anyone else we haven't heard from? Mel.
Hi, Mel Kleckner. Brian, I'm the town administrator, and I want to thank you for coming here and talking to us today. I had just a couple of specific questions, and I want to talk more generally about how the town views surveys and some of the policy issues around them. So this survey is authorized by the cities of Medford and Somerville, and they're being funded with a fee like you're asking us to do?
No, actually, these are the Tufts University, the Tisch College at Tufts University is paying for this as a research study. So this is not being done, with town funds from either of those towns.
But you're asking the town to participate financially because of the add-on, or what? For
Brookline, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, because we don't have funds to do more surveys. So that would be why we would need. We can't afford to send out the letters to Brookline residents inviting them to take the survey without.
No, I understand. I just wanted to clarify. And you're doing that. You are funding that for your host communities.
Yeah, Tufts is, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So just generally, it's mostly to the committee, Brian, as well. Surveys are obviously a very important part of government and social services. We're always trying to figure a way to measure, attitudes and performance and so on. And so often surveys are a good way to do that. And I'm personally very focused on data and information from which to build decisions. So, I'm supportive of surveys. The town uses surveys, but what's happened is because surveys, I think, have become so easy to do on the internet, and and a lot of departments and folks who don't have funding, like to use the cheap way and to do it that way. But as you all know, those who've been trained in this, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of principles of survey methodology, about statistically valid surveys and response rates and ways to ask questions and all that. So what has happened is we've created a policy in the town, more of an administrative policy that requires anybody who wants to do a survey under the town's name, if you will, has to, coordinate that through my office. And usually what I'm looking for is, to make sure that it is a statistically valid and appropriate survey, that there is some reason behind it, that there's some thought, an articulation of why we're doing the survey, making sure it's coordinated with other surveys that may be being done, and also, the financial consequences of that. So there's a lot that goes into it. But generally speaking, we're very supportive of survey research for the town. In fact, I want to mention and want to send this to you, all of you, is we participate in a survey called the National Citizen Survey. We've done it 3 times now. It's used by a lot of communities throughout the country. I will send you the results because there are questions about policing, public safety in there. We're asking questions about a lot of aspects of our community in that survey. But just so you know, there is that survey out there 3 times now, so you can see some trends. I'm not suggesting that's that's what we should rely on. I'm not opposed to more surveys. I will mention, and I think it's been mentioned, that the other committee is doing a survey. It's focused on I believe on the walk and talk program in the Housing Authority. That is being sort of done homegrown, if I believe. And I think it's a much more focused survey. But I note the comments that we got to be careful that we're not bombarding people with surveys or kind of giving mixed messages and so on. Ideally, we like to identify the reason for the survey before we approve a survey and the actual questions and the survey. Now, in this case, I know it's a last minute thing because the survey has been developed for Somerville and Medford, and it's available for us to take, but I understand it's a take it or leave it. So, I know everybody probably has, if you asked everybody here, they probably have a problem with some questions in there, but that's sort of the nature of surveys. And I think that's why you try to go with somebody who has good reputation. And as Brian mentioned, he has an advisory board that looks over his research proposal. So I guess the only other thing I would say is the money. When this committee was created, or in anticipation of this committee being created, the town meeting appropriated $50,000 to support the committees, to the committee at the time. And then, of course, we created 2 committees. So the $50,000 is available for both committees. I think it's fair to probably assume that both committees should have equal access. And so I'm kind of setting aside $25,000 for each committee. My understanding, this is $15,000 of that 25. Even that, I would feel necessary role to make sure the board's comfortable with this methodology of how to split the money up and allowing the committee to determine how its money is to be spent. So I guess that's the only thing I would say. So you're going to take a vote on this, Raul, and okay, very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. That was really helpful context. I learned a lot in that, actually. Thank you. Dan, I see you unmuting.
Yeah, I just wanted to see Brian, and thanks for coming. I'm a retired police chief from Brookline, and I just had a couple of questions on the questions in the survey, and if there was any. I'm just wondering how they get dealt with. And one of them is the the question towards the end where you have to choose between, is this function going to be handled by a police officer or a social worker? And then the third column is not sure. Well, I know Brookline has the beginning stages of a number 3, which is a team approach. And that's social workers and police responding to calls together. And that's not an option. So I'm wondering how you would account for something like that when that is a valid way of answering some of those calls. And then the other, well, I guess it's just something of mine that you're probably going to get a lot of negative responses, is the discretion question around the use of force. When I looked at that, I said, I'm going to answer no, because it goes far beyond the police officer's discretion as to when he or she uses deadly force. And I'm sure everybody knows that it's training, it's court cases, it's the situation, it's a whole lot of things that narrow the ability for an officer that make his discretion in that area. And I just think that you're going to get a lot of negatives on that one. I'd be surprised if you get any yeses, because that's not the way we do business. So that's the 2 points I had to make. And whatever you, or if you want to comment, that's fine. You know, I'd be interested in see.
Yeah, on the question about who responds, that is a point well taken. And actually, you know, like I said, we haven't sent this out yet. So I think that's reason for me to go back to my group and suggest that maybe we add a both police and social service workers option to the option of categories for that question about who responds to different incidents. The other question, you know, I don't, you know, some of my students came up with that one based on their reading of sort of policy in fact, the quotations came out of some policy that they found, I think in Somerville or Brookline. I can't remember, or not Brookline, Somerville or Medford. Obviously, it's an oversimplified question, so I think your point's well taken. I don't, you know, I meet with my group every week, so I'll bring back your comments to them and see what they think about that. It's useful to have that input. I don't want to like commit to saying that we would change that question or drop it, but I do want to. I think it's fair to discuss that with them.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm just trying. I'm trying to make sure. I don't necessarily myself fully agree with all the questions that are in the survey, but I'm also trying to empower my students who are all very smart and engaged students of color who, you know, have dealt with these issues on the other side of things. So I'm just trying to empower them also as they sort of design this survey. So I'm trying to be you know, sensitive to not, you know, to allow them voice in the way this questionnaire is designed.
Thanks.
Yeah, I actually, you know, having looked at that question, for anybody looking in the packet, it's question number 33. I actually agree with Dan. I think the way that it's written, be hard pressed to find.
Right.
By the way, we might, as a community, might surprise ourselves, but be hard pressed to see somebody, you know, agree to that question. But okay, that was fair. All right, I want to take just Mike and Ann. We've got to get us to a vote.
Sure. I'm a little bit concerned about the funding, not so much because of the money. I realize there's a cost to doing this. Brian, you should know that I'm the chair of the town finance committee, so that's, you know, sort of reflexive. But I'm actually more interested, Raul or Mel, what else might we need to pay for? Because if we have $10,000 left, this represents, you know, 60% of what we have to spend.
Well, we're covering all the staff costs, staffing, and administrative expenses of the committee. But if you wanted to procure professional services, if you wanted a consultant, survey, for example, like we're talking about, or I don't know, if you wanted to bring in an expert from, policing somewhere, and you had to cover some of those costs. So I'm thinking more professional type of services. That's what I have in mind.
All right. Raul, do you anticipate any of that, or?
I don't. I mean, I can imagine something in the order of what Mel said, one of the subcommittees saying we think it'd be really helpful to engage with X consultant on something. Frankly, because of the short timeline we have, engaging in folks other than those who are willing to come in and speak with us, and there are lots of folks that would be willing to come in and just speak with us about this work. I mean, at this very moment, I'm hard pressed to imagine us spending $10,000 on such services in the short time frame that we have to do our work. But I mean, it's also not out of the realm of possibility.
If I could just add into, I mean, this is not really my area of expertise, so it's something that is just, come to mind, but maybe Mike, since his role on the advisory committee, he may have actually more experience with it or expertise on it. But the procurement of services over $10,000 would, I think, implicate the Procurement Act, state law, and which would require bidding procedures. I think you'd have to bid it out to three different or seek three different bids. So I just want to make sure that the cost of that is not exceeding, for the survey is not exceeding $10,000. But again, Mike or even Mel may have more experience with that.
It's a good question, Michael. All goods and services at some level need to be procured competitively. There are a lot of exemptions and a lot of recognition that cities and towns, government organizations can do services amongst each other. Without that, I don't know how this is categorized. I know it's Tufts University, which is a private institution, but working with the two cities, I don't know. I'd have to check with our procurement officer. But it also raises the question, Brian, I don't think the town is concerned about paying costs for the thing, but we don't want to subsidize any of Tufts' costs for the other two municipalities. And so I think that's the only thing I would say about the cost is if there are direct costs for Brookline's participation, mailing and others, that's fine, but we're not going to subsidize the survey.
No, it would, the cost would be almost entirely for the mailings of the invitations to the survey. And then a little bit just for sort of the time for processing and weighting the data to send it back to you. But besides that, nothing, there's the funds for the other two communities are sort of already set basically. So that that wouldn't be the problem.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I see no more hands up now. It's 9:45, I've got to get us to a vote. This vote essentially will allow, we'll let the town administrator know that that this is something the task force would like to request. And then of course the town administrator's office needs to do the due diligence that that Mel explained in his earlier comments to be able to move this forward. Okay. I'm going to move that that we agree to participate in this survey, and there's an opportunity. I see Bonnie's hand. There's an opportunity with that motion on the floor to have discussion before we vote. So Bonnie, comments?
Sorry, I'm just making sure that we have a minute to talk before we vote.
Okay, we do.
So I'm curious, if we approve this, how will we be represented with this? Is this coming from the task force, or is this a study that we're agreeing to participate in that's coming from Tufts?
Brian?
I would treat this the way I'm treating the other two communities. which would be that this would come from Tufts, basically, that this would basically tell respondents would get a letter that has on Tufts letterhead saying this is a research study being conducted by Tufts.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to lean out of the glaring sun. So I guess that question was more for the town, like when, so clearly the town doesn't need to be like, here's the reason you're getting this survey from Tufts. It's just going to be a survey from Tufts that we now have access to. That sounds right, right? Okay.
I do, by the way, as we vote on this, I want to make sure that it's including all of the agreements that Dr. Schaffner sort of mentioned, the edits that he said, yeah, this makes sense to change this. The addition of that line at the bottom, which we'll need to draft, I think, that says if we'd love to hear more of your perspectives on this, here's how you can reach us, I think is critical for people that want to engage more in this. So I think including that too would be part of this. Great.
So our name would be on this.
Yeah.
I think in that section at the end, I don't know if it needs to be, you know, do you have thoughts on whether or not it should?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that this is certainly not a reimagining survey. It has questions on whether people believe that the police are doing their job or not, but it's not asking questions in that direction. So if this is a survey, I mean, we could certainly use this information, particularly in the defense of anything we put forward, but it isn't the work, right? And maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe that's exactly, maybe that's the purpose of this, that this is the background study. But when I think about asking people questions, I think about, for instance, I mean, the last question, the police or social worker, those are not options. You know, like, I mean, those are, in our context, the police or social worker, I mean, I would call an ambulance for the person that's overdosing, probably. I don't know, I'm just, and I feel like I don't mean to criticize Brian and his students. I'm criticizing it for use of our stuff. I want to make that clear. Yeah, so if we're deciding on this as some background information that we're participating in for $15,000, yeah, most people sound like they're on board with this. So I'm fine to roll with this, but this to me is not reimagining work. And when we put our name on it and then we go into the community, I just want to make sure that we make, that we have a way to I don't know. And maybe I might be way overthinking this. Please push back if you feel that's the case.
All right. I see a lot of hands. I'm going to go to voices. I haven't heard enough from today. So I'm going to go Alexander, Kristen, and then we'll circle back to some other folks.
Just very briefly, I agree with Bonnie. I've been largely hanging back in this discussion because I have yet to be convinced of the prioritization of this survey. I agree. I think that there's a lot of ways that it can be useful, and I think the collection of more data of what people are thinking is never a bad thing. I'm not yet convinced that it's $15,000 worth of useful. I'm willing to be outvoted, but that's where I'm at.
Kristen?
I've appreciated the earnest discussion on this, and I think I was very struck by some of what I heard Ann saying earlier, in that I think it's particularly important for us as a group to be thinking about what value this would bring to the conversations and dialogue that we're trying to have. I don't think that this would be our only bite at the apple for being able to hear from the community in Brookline. And I also very much appreciate if Dr. Schaffner is trying to craft a survey that respects the agency and ability of his students. That's a particularly important thing for Dr. Schaffner to do. It might not be what we need to do. And I think there's a lot about the way that we communicate to the town and think about public safety that I think we can do and then do surveying before starting with the surveying. But I've very much appreciated the perspectives that are emerging in this conversation.
Thank you. Anne?
I agree with Alexander and Kristen and Bonnie. I'm not against using this survey, but I noticed that Ronald Wilkinson made a comment in the Q&A section about saying how this is very reform-oriented survey. So if I propose that the Reform Committee take on the cost of this survey, and then we use whatever data would be applicable to us in furthering our agenda and mission. But I don't think that this survey is specific enough to our mission to spend that kind of money moving ahead.
Okay, Kimberly.
So when I think about reimagining policing and when I think about police reform, I think about how the police affects people of color in Brookline. And when I think about this survey, which I can't imagine that the people who we're thinking about around, not that only the people of color matter in Brookline, that's not what I'm saying. But when I think about how the police affects people of color in Brookline or people of color that come through Brookline, I don't see how this survey is beneficial. I don't see how spending $15,000 to ask mostly white folks what they think about policing or this survey. I feel like, and it's just my opinion, that it's a waste of money. And not that it may give us some good stuff, but I don't think that's what we're here for. And I don't know, I can't imagine spending. And so if we were to vote, I'm real honest that I just vote no.
Chichi.
Thanks, Raul. You know, I just want to say I certainly hear and understand all the concerns of the folks that are on the fence or critical of the idea of doing this. One of the sayings I like to live my life by is not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. You know, being on the envisioning committee and knowing, okay, so we have a public hearing coming up. You know, in terms of other work that's actually going to happen in terms of community engagement, I do think Raul's right that are we really realistically going to have $25,000 worth of expenses for it? You know, we did talk about focus groups, but I don't know if we can actually run a focus group by December 15th. You know, can we, you know, there's a couple of comments by Ron Wilkerson in the Q&A about looking for other surveys to be part of. You know, if that's a possibility, but we don't know at this point. And I did want to flag that, yeah, he mentioned that, you know, maybe the cost could be split with the reform committee. And so, I mean, I just want to be realistic as to what the envisioning community engagement subcommittee is going to be able to do by December 15th if we don't participate in this survey. And there are some questions in here that would give our committee valuable information. And then for the town as a whole, I think there is valuable information. Maybe not the kind of information we want, or, you know, maybe we'd want more. But are we going to actually get more if we don't do this by December 15th is the question. You know, procedurally, I think we could, you know, frame this vote as a recommendation contingent upon the tweaks we talked about, plus the approval by town administration, and also contingent upon compliance with the Procurement Act. But, you know, those are my thoughts on it. And I would support it because I think we'll have less information if we don't do this. I don't realistically think that there's a whole $25,000 worth of work to do that we're going to be able to accomplish by December 15th.
We'll make sure to include those contingencies in the vote as you mentioned them. I've got 4 hands up and it's 9:57. Mike Salmon.
I'll speak very quickly. I'm going to vote no on this. I've been involved in constructing a survey with volunteer help from a professional in Brookline, Jennifer Goldsmith, a town meeting member, who helped us put together a survey of all the town meeting members after the virtual town meeting that we had. And I know how much work it takes. I appreciate that Dr. Schaffner is working with students, and it's very important for them to have the experience of putting together a survey. But honestly, to the point that we'll get information out of this, if you don't have a really solidly thought through survey, the information you get is not going to be particularly valuable. The other thing I would say is just because we have $25,000 doesn't mean we have to spend it. And so we should be spending our money wisely if we spend it at all. Thanks.
Well, I certainly agree with that, the last part. Malcolm.
I carry some concern much more about survey fatigue from a lot of adults in town. Have had to do a lot of surveys for the public schools recently and things like that. With that being said, I personally have always tried to err on the side of information. And I do worry about our human power. As much as we may be able to create another survey, when you start thinking about distribution, culling that data, reporting on that data and pushing it out, that's going to take human power from somewhere. And right now, Tufts is willing to do it. And we do have the money. And what I hear from Ron Wilkinson's point is, because there's so much to reform, instead of thinking this is 25,000 versus 25,000, this can be a town 15,000, which would leave us with 17.5, and with reform with 17.5. And so for me, with our brevity of time and other things, I would endorse moving on this. I share concerns with people, and I hear what people are saying, and I do share that. And I also, again, with my school's hat, think about how many surveys we've asked our parents in town to do, over the last few months. And I think this will give us information that I think if we balk now, we won't get it. And that's where I would stand with that.
Thanks, Malcolm. Yeah, I will just say, based on my own experience, my view in this vote is either we're going to have a statistically valid survey with the type of analysis that'll come along with this, or we won't really have a survey at all. I mean, anything else is not going to provide the kind of credibility and validity that a survey like this would provide. We can say we don't think that this is what we're doing here, and so it's a great survey, but it won't help really inform our work. But the idea that we're going to say no to this and then later on decide to come up with our own survey, I think that's not serious. That just can't happen. So anyway, so just so we know what we're voting on and what the consequences of it would be. Kimberly.
I'm just wondering, realistically, who do we anticipate answering the survey? How many, I just really, when I think about it, it goes out to Brookline residents, who's going to fill out this survey? And if you send it to people that's in Brookline housing, where the most people of color are, do you think that they're going to answer the survey? I don't think so. And so then if that's the case, we've left out a group of people who are really important in this work. And so, if you guys think that it's important, then I'll vote yes with you. But I feel like, honestly, we're not going to get the numbers that we need from the people that we're thinking about. But I will vote with the majority.
Ryan, is that concern addressed in oversampling, or is oversampling not going to cut it?
That's why we do the oversampling. I want to, we're very cognizant to make sure that we are going to especially sample from non-white people of color populations so that we have a large enough sample of those groups. You know, if you tell me like, you know, even though we oversample those groups that they're still not going to answer, like, well, at that point, there's nothing we can do about that. But I'm, you know, I think having done lots and lots of surveys, there tend to be lower response rates among particular types of groups. But, you know, oversampling hopefully compensates for that. And then on the back end, what we do is we can weight the data so that, you know, those who do respond basically can reflect basically those who, you know, didn't respond. So we know who did respond, we know who didn't respond, so we know how those people are different, and therefore we can adjust for that at the back end.
Okay, thank you. All right, so it's 10:02. I have to move us to a vote only because I believe we're going to lose voting members, and I want everybody's voice to be heard in this. Bonnie, do you have something you'd like to say before we vote? Or Kristen, I saw your hand up too.
2 seconds. How similar is this to the Reform Committee survey? Is this like, these are not these are questions that I assume are also on the Reform Committee. Like, if just to solve one problem of over surveying people, maybe they might be considering using the survey as well and not sending an additional survey.
This is Devin. I know that the content of the Reform Committee survey can be found in their packet, which you also have access to. That would have been in this past Wednesday's meeting. I believe, just a very preliminary understanding, that it is mostly focused on the walk and talk program. It's not a general policing survey. It's extremely specific to that program.
Got it. Thank you.
Kristen, good?
Yeah, my comments really quickly. I largely agree with what I hear from Kimberly. I'm not sure that Brookline has done the work to get people of color to make the investment of energy to respond to this. And so that we would end up trying to use oversampling in a way that doesn't pan out for us.
All right, well, let's go ahead and take a vote, and then we'll move on from there. The motion is on the floor to vote to enter into this survey that we've been discussing with the contingencies that Chi mentioned earlier, the diligence and everything, as well as the edits that Dr. Schaffner agreed to make. And so let's go ahead and do a roll call vote. We'll take it from there. So all those in favor, just going across the screen. Almas?
Aye.
Ann?
Abstain.
Kristen?
No, nay.
Bonnie?
No.
Chi-Chi?
Aye.
Alexander?
Nay.
Was that aye? Was that
It was
nay?
a no. I was saying nay.
I thought it was. I wasn't sure. Mike?
No.
Kimberly? Kimberly, we just lost you.
No.
No, got it. Malcolm?
Yes.
And the chair votes aye. So that motion fails with, Devin, I've got 5-4 to 1. Am I right or wrong?
You're right.
Okay. All right. So Dr. Schaffner, we appreciate your time with us. This is something that the Committee on Policing Reforms, as I've seen at least a couple of members of that committee weigh in our Q&A, that they may be interested in taking up. Mike, thanks. I know you got to go. And so we may be in touch with you again about that. Mel?
If I just, Brian, thank you again. And if there is some interest, what's our deadline?
We are fielding in Somerville and Medford in early October. It could always go out to Brookline later than that, but I know that you also have like other deadlines about when you need results back. So, you know, I would say like at whatever point you need results back, you would want to be sending out the invitations, you know, at least a month or a month and a half before that. So.
Well, if we were going to go on the same timeline as Medford and Somerville, what's our deadline for telling you yes or no?
I would say maybe like October 5th or 7th or something like that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your time today.
No problem.
Thanks, Dr. Schaffner. Take care. Okay, so folks, the last item, and I'm sorry that we're over right now. Well, it's really your fault. It was a great discussion. I think beyond the vote that we took in terms of participating in this specific survey, we also learned a lot, I think, about the attitudes of task force members and our orientation to this work. So I think that's really helpful. And the points about that, those last couple points, I think that Kimberly and Kristen especially made about whether or not we've done the work to earn the responses from communities of color is one that I think is really well taken. And that's something that we, certainly the Subcommittee on Community Engagement and Visioning, but I think the larger task force needs to think about in this work and what it looks like, you know, for this community to gain that trust and how we can be part of that in our own work, and others can too. So thank you for that. I think it was a really valuable discussion. The last thing that we have on our agenda is next Wednesday, we've got a public hearing scheduled jointly with the Committee on Policing Reforms. I believe it's at 7 p.m. On Wednesday, the 30th. We'll have some information that you can share with your networks. This is not an opportunity for us to engage in a sort of back and forth. We'll have forums. We'll create forums, I believe, where we can do that. This is literally, you know, the way that the format will play out is I'll make a brief statement. The chair of the Committee on Policing Reforms will make a brief statement, and then we are there to hear from the public. Each member of the public will have up to 3 minutes to say whatever it is they want to say. You know, certainly I'm hoping that that for our purposes, what we hear is the public, especially giving us more direction on where they'd like to see areas that are maybe ripe for reimagining. There might be some valuable information for the Reform Committee as well, but for our purposes, you know, what are the areas that members of the public think are ripe for reimagining, and how we can use that information to help guide our work. But it is ultimately up to members of the public what they like to share. Do not need to be Brookline residents. We understand that there are people who engage with policing in Brookline, many who are not residents. And so those folks are welcome to share their views too. I'll make sure we get some information to you that you can share with others. I know that we probably should have had some kind of promo out much sooner than this, but please know that this is not our only opportunity to do this. We can host our own public hearings and forums and other ways to engage. This is just the beginning, a preliminary hearing. So know that this is not the end all be all. We'll have lots more bites at this apple. Kimberly.
I was just going to ask, one, is there a way that we can put out something to the community to make sure that they show up for this meeting, especially in BHA? And two, I wonder, I know of people who've had some really bad experiences with Brookline police that live in Boston, and I wonder if how do we hear their voices? Can they be a part of this public meeting? Can we bring them into one of these task force meetings just to tell their story?
Well, I certainly think that's going to be part of our work, especially through the Envisioning Subcommittee, to figure out what we think the most appropriate ways to bring those stories to light are. I firmly believe that we should create platforms for people to share their own stories if they want to, but also understand that some people might not want to share their trauma publicly, and that we also need to create opportunities for people to be able to share that information with us privately. So that's something that we've got to figure out what that looks like for us.
This is Devin. I just wanted to answer the first part of Kimberly's question. It is being publicly posted today, just with a brief description saying this is a listening session being hosted by these two groups. We have a press release also going out today that will hit all the major newspapers in the area, as well as being posted on all of our social media channels. And then we'll just continue to publicize that leading up to Wednesday. Casey Hatchett from the Reform Committee did put together a flyer. She has a contact at Housing Authority that she is going to share. So a paper distribution will also happen as well, because we know that, online is not, the best way to reach all of the community members.
And also, thank you for that, Devin. I also was going to say, I too know someone personally who definitely wants to tell their story. And so I don't know how to talk with that person about that. And I don't want to.
This is Devin again. Sorry, I can just jump in quickly here. The Citizen Complaint Committee on the subcommittee from the Reforms group has worked with Chief O'Leary, and they have, done an outreach message to people who have submitted complaints about the police. And the chair is having those folks reach out to Lloyd Gelano to, express if they feel comfortable sharing their experience with that group. So you can definitely, point them to Lloyd or to me if you know someone personally who wants to share with the task force or the Reform Committee.
Thank you.
And let me make sure that this is clear for anybody who's out there listening, and that you can let folks know when you talk to them. And I know I mentioned that each person will have up to 3 minutes to comment. There's no way that if someone is sharing a story that that they feel like they need to share with the community about their engagement with police in the town of Brookline, or some other form of discrimination with the town of Brookline. There's no way that we're going to mute that person at the end of 3 minutes or ask them to stop sharing that story. When we have those opportunities to hear those stories, which so seldom get heard in certain segments of our community, we want to make sure that people have that opportunity. So just if you can make sure that folks know that we're not just going to cut somebody off if they're in the middle of sharing something really heartfelt and important for us to hear. With that said, general comments, we really appreciate if people can keep to 3 minutes so that we do have an opportunity to hear from everybody. And I will say it is 10:14. I've got Ann's hand up. Here's the deal. I want to say this before Ann, and then we can close. But I'm probably have to be a little bit more strict with our conversations that we're having within the 2 hours that we have together, just because I know folks make other plans. Folks have work commitments that they need to get to. Our staff have work commitments that they need to get to, and we also we have the threat of losing quorum to be able even to continue these conversations. So this is the second meeting where we've gone over by now 15 minutes. I'm going to make sure I may need to cut off debate on certain items earlier than I normally would in future meetings, so that we can make sure that we honor other people's commitments. But Ann, please.
I'm confused about the setup of this Wednesday night listening session. Has there been a summary or a protocol of how it's going to happen? I heard that there are videos of police departments.
This is Devin. Those are specific to the Reform Committee. They are doing their own educational track, and those videos are going to be uploaded to their particular committee website for folks to watch if they'd like to. They're also doing an educational piece at the beginning of each of their meetings that has nothing to do with your joint public hearing on Wednesday. The way that Dr. Fernandez and the chair of the Reform Committee have communicated this to me is that their vision is, in the first 5 minutes, each of them will address the groups, say a welcome, give one sentence about, the work of each group and what they've done, and then we're immediately going to open it to public comment. And as Dr. Fernandez mentioned, that will ideally be 3 minutes per person, unless there is a personal anecdote or a, citizen complaint that, needs obviously sensitive and more time.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to know the agenda.
That's fair. All right, thank you, folks. We'll push out some information that you can push out to others on this. Devin also, as we mentioned earlier, will set up an email chain for each of the subcommittees so that you can start to plan your first meeting. As far as the agenda for our next meeting, that is on next Friday, October 2nd. A good portion of our meeting will be reflecting on the public comment that we would have heard at the Wednesday night hearing. And I'd love to hear how the initial organizing for the subcommittees is going. It would be terrific if you would have had at least a preliminary meeting between now and the next time we meet on Friday, even if that's an hour just to organize yourselves. I think that would make sense. But of course, that's dependent on your schedules. Okay. Devin's asking, Devin, do you think we need to include anything else, or is there anything else that needs to be included on that agenda, task force members, you believe right now? Okay, please let us know, communicate with Devin if there's something that you'd like for us to add to that agenda for next Friday. All right, everybody, appreciate the overtime. I'm gonna start cutting off debate a little bit earlier. Love you all, and get to what you need to. Thank you very much, appreciate you.